The North Star of the Wilson Rickenbaugh administration will be to put families first.
Well, that's what Alan Wilson is promising if he's South Carolina's next governor. His announcement this week has some of his opponents, though, dropping the gloves in the race for the governor's mansion. We'll look at the latest polls, plus a troubling cover story about one of the candidates.
I think this is as clear as it ought to be, and I think if you try to get too cute with it, I think you undermine the effort here.
The South Carolina Senate pushing forward some long-awaited DUI reforms in a state with a bad track record. We look at what it could mean for public safety.
Plus, the health of a South Carolina icon. Charleston's longtime mayor Joe Riley, the risk-taking leader who led the Holy City's boom, is now being slowed by a dreadful disease that so many of us know too well.
We've got to get a grip on this. The reason why I'm bringing this forward is because we need to do something about measles. We need to protect our children.
Stopping the spread of measles, now a topic of discussion on the Senate floor in this state. State leaders say something has to be done to stop what's on pace to be the biggest outbreak in nearly 40 years. We look at what, if anything, can be done at the State House to make a difference. It is officially another Sunday in South Carolina. I'm Brian McConkey.
I'm Catherine Glenn Foster.
And I'm Dave Wilson. This week's Connected to the Capitol starts right now.
The North Star of the Wilson Rickenbaugh administration will be to put families first.
Alan Wilson says putting family first is about holding government accountable in this state. This past week, Wilson saying if he's elected, his lieutenant governor, Mike Reichenbach, would be in charge of auditing state agencies, which would expand the role of that office significantly than it has had in the past, for certain. That's where we begin on this Sunday morning on Connect to the Capitol. Back in the studio this week, we have Catherine Glenn Foster and Dave Wilson back from the snow. The sun was out again. So it's good to have everyone home.
We're glad to be back home.
Let's talk about this governor's race now, because that right there by Mr. Wilson, obviously a platform that he's going to be running on. But his opponents came out and just said, hey, Pamela Evette said, why don't you follow the laws already in place, Mr. Attorney General?
It is a battle of wits now, more than anything
and criticisms
else.
And jabs, and it's like watching a boxing.
We've watched everybody start to see if they can get a name in the field, get some name ID, some name recognition there, and I think now it's time for the fight to start happening, because name ID is not enough.
We have the tools in place. We have the right laws. They perhaps could go further. We could do more, but we have so many of the tools already in our tool belt. So at this point, it really is about enforcement, but then also what more can we do while still pursuing that enforcement angle? Because without that, you can pass all the laws you want. Nothing will change.
And that, I think, is the Achilles heel that I think some of Alan Wilson's opponents are going to use in this race, because as the state's chief prosecutor, it is his responsibility to enforce these laws. And we seem to be adding layer upon layer upon layer of law for law for law for law. And it becomes rather cumbersome, especially from a legal standpoint and a judicial standpoint, to begin to decipher through those things.
And figuring out how they mesh together, how they can actually be enforced in a courtroom, how they apply. But with that said, taking a step back, taking a national level perspective, this is not a South Carolina problem. This is a national problem, both at the federal level, of course, and in every single state, where the legislature often, it can be tough to get them to get something passed. But then once they do, the question is what happens next? And all too often, it seems to just sit there or get pulled out from time to time for kind of a show appearance before it gets tucked back in the tool belt.
And we are beginning to see now, you're going to have campaigns coming out, doing press conferences like these, talking about big policy ideas, talking about all of these things, when the reality is you're going to have to get it through the legislature. So it is as much an inside baseball game as an outside baseball game. And I know we're going to talk some polling numbers today, because the South Carolina Policy Council has now come out with a new poll.
Yeah, we got the Republican numbers here.
And this is an interesting poll. Marcus, can we pull that up real quick? Here's the latest in the governor's race.
Who's ahead?
Imagine this. So Nancy Mace is at 18% right now. Alan Wilson and Pam Evitt at 12%. Ralph Norman at 11%. And Josh Kimbrell still in the race with 4%. It's really interesting because if you go back to 2010, when Nikki Haley was running against Andre Bauer and Larry Grooms and Henry McMaster and Gresham Barrett, these were the exact same type of numbers that we saw then with Haley, where Kimbrell is right now. She was 5th in a 5-person race, and we all understand the outcome was very different. So
Yes, it was.
This snapshot in time
And that's all it is.
is like a Polaroid that came and went.
And I remember the race you're talking about. I was sitting in this studio with, at the time, Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer, and he was up high in the polls.
Right.
And we were talking about Haley being lower. He was very confident. And then about a day later, things changed. Things changed in a hurry. Now, interestingly enough, when Nancy Mace is on the top of the poll, she's also the subject of a story in the New York Magazine where they are getting information from former staffers who saying she's unwell. And she is calling this a hit piece. But they're giving specifics. Alcohol runs in the middle of the night, phony online accounts to say that she's beautiful and the hottest member of Congress. Nancy's always in the headlines, we'll give her that.
She certainly is.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot of new information necessarily in this. It really was a rehashing, but it combined all of what we've heard and raised real questions about leadership style and more. So when you look at all of that, for me, it's going back to the voters. The voters are going to decide,
Yeah.
but this is information that South Carolinians deserve to have as we head for the polls.
Because this is, I think, one of the first times we've seen a story of this nature that has consolidated all of the rumors, all of the different anecdotes that we've been hearing. It's now all in this one package, in this one story. Of course, you're going to call it a hit piece if it's against you. I mean, that's the nature of what this is. But I think at the onset, to Catherine, to your point, this is the question that you start have to asking at home. Is this a leadership style that you want? We've gone from Nikki Haley and Mark Sanford. We turn around and you flip that over, and now you've got Henry McMaster. Very different styles. This is a question of stylistics and how effective can you be once you're in office?
That's a key question, too, because the allegations were out there. They did the investigation. A lot of these sources are anonymous, but nonetheless, just the fact that this is out there, that this is a story, and that this is a story in this magazine, it says a lot.
Yeah, it says a whole bunch. On the other, there's not many candidates on the Democratic side, but we at least want to mention that the Policy Council did do a Democratic race poll. Jermaine Johnson with an overwhelming lead over Mullins McLeod right now, but still, think about that. 67% haven't made a decision yet, so another snapshot in time.
It's the fact that Jermaine Johnson, who, if you want to catch interviews, we've had interviews with him. You can catch him on the website. But to have gotten out of the 1,200 registered voters who were a part of this poll to get a 25% tack right there on the Democratic side shows that Johnson is at least got a strong foothold, and McLeod has got a long way to catch up, and I don't know that that's going to be happening.
No, it might not. It might not. So we'll see how it all plays out very soon.
Yes.
It'll be 3-4 months away, and that'll be here when it feels like about 3 or 4 days.
Yes.
So when we come back, though, we're taking a look at some, they're not law yet, but some major reform packages when it comes to DUI, and also something that would prevent a form of abortion from coming to this state. That's when we come back.
I think this is as clear as it ought to be, and I think if you try to get too cute with it, I think you undermine the effort here.
The state Senate this week pushing forward a plan that reforms really weak state DUI laws, and they did it with a rare bipartisan show of support in a 45-0 vote. The bill adds penalties when an impaired driver injures rather than kills someone in a crash to the point where the victim loses consciousness or requiring anesthesia. If you want to understand why this issue is so important, pull out your insurance bill for your car. Because
all
if
you really
you
need.
paid that bill, it is amazing to see the difference in rates one state to another. We had a friend of ours move from North Carolina to South Carolina. The insurance rates for the same car with the same insurance company went up 300%. That's why these DUI issues are having to be addressed. That's one of the things when we talk about the tort reform we talked about last time, when we talk about DUI reform, because we're paying for it one way or the other.
It also really is a question of fairness, because if you are significantly injured but don't pass away, that still has a tremendous effect. It can have lifelong effects on you and on your family. And so it shouldn't have to rise to the level of actual death to actually put something into place that's going to protect victims.
I think when we look at how these pieces pair together, these are major reforms that the state has recognized they needed to do. The interesting part and how you can tell how important this is, one, bipartisan support in the Senate is not necessarily all that rare. It does happen, but a 45-0 vote, they were voting like the House.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
you remember last year
On liquor reform.
on liquor
Yes.
liability reform. I mean, the House was just like, pass it and send it over, and that's exactly what the Senate has done now. Now, don't get me wrong; they spent a lot of time in the off season. During the off season of the legislature to come back and ready to hit this one out of the park, and the Senate has done so. I don't think we're going to have that much of an issue over in the House.
We definitely will not. This is an issue that affects potentially all South Carolinians, because we all could be the victims of a drunk driver. You know, we don't have the ability to control who is out there on our roads coming right at us or coming alongside us. And so when we all have that risk factor, it's only fair that we all have greater protections.
Right.
Yeah, and speaking of the House, they did push forward legislation this week on yet another abortion-related matter, which continues to come up in both chambers, as we know. This would stop mail-order abortion pills from coming into this state. It would make it a felony if someone were to, if they were to get into the hands of a minor who then suffered some type of irreparable harm or even death. So yet another step to further this debate in a state where the polls show people say, I think we got it covered.
That's right. And so this is an open area of the law, basically, where South Carolina is leading on the area of abortion. People can decide for themselves which direction South Carolina is leading in. But states have the ability to regulate medicine. The federal government has the ability to regulate the Postal Service. And so there's this, this showdown that's coming.
And that's been the interesting part, because the showdown, the post office side of this is a law from like 1857. And laws, as we said just a little while ago, laws don't necessarily roll off the books just because time has passed. So they're using a statute, a code of law in the U.S. that says, hey, listen, we have to regulate what does and doesn't happen with the Postal Service. And South Carolina, I don't want to say they're beating the dead horse, but they are just continuing on this particular issue.
The horse isn't doing well, we'll put it that way.
Yeah,
This is true.
And they're trying to find creative ways to address issues of abortion and make sure that abortion is not a primary medical procedure that can take place in South Carolina. Whether you agree with that or not, there are proponents on that side who are trying every which way. But the bigger question we have to start asking, Catherine, I think is, okay, beyond birth, what's next?
Yes.
And the age of laws is a common point of attack for people who don't like one side of an issue, but there are plenty of much older laws that we do like. We appreciate our Bill of Rights still, and we want to adhere to that. But as we come back, we're going to be turning to Charleston and on the health of a 4-decade-long Charleston mayor, Joe Riley, who has recently announced that he is living with Alzheimer's. We'll be back soon. The health of a South Carolina icon. Charleston's longtime mayor, Joe Riley, the risk-taking leader who led the Holy City's boom, is now being slowed by a dreadful disease that so many of us know too well. Joe Riley, who is credited with shaping modern Charleston and now living with this horrible disease. I'm reminded a year and a couple weeks, I lost one of my own family members to Alzheimer's, and I think we all know someone who's suffered with that.
I've had family members with it. I've had close friends who have had family members with it. It is a horrible thing to watch someone go through.
It is.
And South Carolina keeps very good information about this dreadful disease.
Yes.
And they estimate that in the next 10 years or so, it's going to about double the amount of cases here. Maybe because of diagnosis, not because more people are getting it, but more people are seeking the treatment at least. But that doesn't diminish its destructive capabilities in any way. And to see a guy so vibrant that did so much.
Well, to take somebody, a destructive nature like Alzheimer's, onto somebody who was so constructive when it came to changing the face of Charleston. I'll remember, you'll know Charleston Place. If you've ever been down to King Street, there near the market, there was Charleston Place. It was a parking lot, decades ago. And Joe Riley began to push forward on, we've got to have something that anchors this community. He loved the European style. So as you walk through Charleston, you get this sense and this feel. And it created a tourism magnet that it's so interesting. Charleston's airport, one of the largest international airports, at least in the southeast side, save Miami. But you've got a lot of folks, and the tourism advertising that South Carolina does, especially in Great Britain and Europe, brings tons of folks into our state because of a vision and an idea and a mentality that Joe Riley brought for 40 years.
He just contributed to this state and really to the Southeast as a whole in a very unique way. His vision, his inspiration when it came to what the future of his city and the state could look like was really unparalleled.
He was bigger than a mayor's office. He was one of those figures, still is. I don't want to say that he's gone because he's not, but he is one of those figures that during his time in office was bigger than that. It was almost like a statewide leader. And when he spoke, people listened. It didn't matter what part of the state you lived in or if he governed there or not.
And
what you said, though, just now is so important because leadership doesn't end with illness. His leadership, his lasting track record, it's going to live on for decades.
Absolutely is.
And there's such a value and an honesty and a leadership even in his transparency and coming forward to share this news for a state that cares so much for him.
Yeah.
And you've watched over the years as political leaders have had to make this announcement. I mean, one of the first ones that I remember was when Ronald Reagan made the announcement that he was entering that last phase, as he was, what do you call it, the sunset of my life. Shortly thereafter, a very vibrant name of South Carolina, Governor Carroll Campbell, had to write a very similar letter to the people of South Carolina. I worked for him back in the early 90s. Here was his office, here was mine. We spoke on a daily basis, and I'll never forget being at Strom Thurmond's funeral. And he looked at me with a blank stare like, I know I'm supposed to know you from somewhere, but I'm not sure where. Right. And we've experienced it with family. We've experienced with other situations. And if you're going through that, there is support for you.
Absolutely.
There are many different things that are in South Carolina. The Alzheimer's Foundation takes a big stance at the State House.
Where to go. The South Carolina Alzheimer's Association, I've done work with them for many years. Used to coach a fundraiser football game every year. We did that. It used to raise a lot of money and awareness. We played the Blondes versus the Brunettes, and it more than raise money, it raised awareness. It was something fun that people could rally around, and they could connect with because they knew somebody that had that. And that what you were just describing about Governor Campbell, I used to see that in my own grandmother. You'd go to visit her, and you knew she knew you. There'd be a smile on the face, but you couldn't tell it. She couldn't verbalize it, and it's a horrible thing to watch. So the resources are definitely there. The Alzheimer's Association will point you exactly where you need to go. And they are very good at it.
We're so grateful for them. But I was also just reminded that even in this announcement, in the leadership of that transparency, it also points the way yet again for South Carolina as we look towards an aging population and the numbers of people, as you pointed out, who are likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the future, maybe doubling. And it's about how we prioritize resources to both prevent and then treat and care for both the people who are living with Alzheimer's and the caregivers.
Yeah, because that is a burden, and there is relief out there where you can get people to come in and do some of that on a weekly basis, just to give everybody a break.
Tremendous support out there.
It's there, so please don't hesitate to look out for that.
No one's alone.
No, they are not. And when we come back, another public health issue that we need to talk about that isn't going anywhere and continues to grow, and that's measles in the state of South Carolina. It's got people in the Senate now talking. What they can do, I don't know, but we're still going to talk about it when we come back. Seconds.
We've got to get a grip on this. The reason why I'm bringing this forward is because we need to do something about measles. We need to protect our children.
South Carolina right now could be heading for the biggest measles outbreak in this country since 1990. Roughly 900, more than 900 now as of Friday, confirmed, most linked to the outbreak in the upstate. However, there's at least one case confirmed now in the Midlands. That is in Sumter County. So we saw, they're talking about this on the floor of the Senate now. There may not be a policy debate just yet, and there can be. Mandates can be talked about and whatnot, but we know the governor isn't for that. But this is probably more about awareness than anything else. This is dangerous if a child, if anyone gets it. And the unvaccinated are those that come down with this illness. We had a wonderful discussion this morning on Point with Cynthia Hardy, 30-minute discussion. Pediatric infectious disease experts came in, a panel of doctors, just to say how critical it is to just pay attention to what's going on.
We just got back from Washington, D.C., and I can tell you that the state of South Carolina with measles is spreading nationwide.
Yeah.
And it is being discussed not only here in this state, but in the halls of power up in D.C. and throughout the nation, as all the states and the federal government watch to see how South Carolina responds. This is a critical issue, highly contagious, not a trivial illness, when it has long-lasting consequences.
The other long-lasting consequence, though, have been the mandates that some people are pushing back against. You know, it used to be if you wanted to go to school, you had to have a certain set of shots you had to have completed within a certain time period. Take your shot record to school, show that you've been vaccinated for these items. Right. So you also have the religious exemptions. Somebody can say, you know, well, we're going to give you, you need to have the measles shot, and you go religious exemption, and they can't do anything else.
Back off. Yep.
There is a real distrust, I think, that exists for folks that came out of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and saying, okay, I've got these people mandating, demanding that I have this shot, and so there's this unease that some people have had going, well, do I have to do all of these things? Am I required to do this? Can the government tell me to do this? And, well, yes, the government can, but there are exceptions, but these exceptions kind of lead into what we've got now.
And they can particularly tell you this when it comes to your use of state resources, public resources, such as the school system. And yet, there are still concerns because we have to have a critical mass of the population vaccinated in order to ensure that we have a base level of protection. When we don't have that, then we are all at risk, even if you're vaccinated. And this, again, is an illness that is highly contagious and all too often fatal.
Yeah, it can be. It can be. It is dangerous nonetheless. And if you want more information, 30 minutes about this on Point with Cynthia Hardy. We have that posted for you at wach.com.
Great conversation.
There's a lot to learn there. I learned a lot
Yeah.
that I'm frightened about right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So please, for the health of yourself and your family, you might want to give that a look. That's all the time we have here on Connect to the Capitol. We hope you have a great week. We'll see you again next Sunday.
Have a great week.